You tiptoed those words out like you were uttering a heresy there.
Yeah, well, I'm uttering a profundity, maybe a kind of think of this idea that if you represent the people by election, you build your democracy around a certain kind of DNA, a certain kind of
Yeah.
a certain kind of logic, and that logic is competitive. That logic is declaratory. It's performative. It's is this sounding good to you, Colm? You know, I mean, these are
Yeah.
the things that are going wrong, and this other way to represent the people is to get the people to represent the people as they do in juries.
Nicholas, the the good thing about anything like this is grab their attention with a good title, and once you start mentioning angels, you'll have everybody's attention for various reasons. Tell me about better angels, and I presume there are worse angels. Where did you find the phrase "better angels"? What does it mean? Who said it?
Well, of course, it's a famous expression that Abraham Lincoln used. I'm actually not sure whether he used it at the beginning of his presidency or towards the end, but I think it might be the second inaugural. But he's the great president during the Civil War, and he's kind of famous. He's one of the rarest of politicians, a humble person, big ego but humble, interesting combination. And he steers his way through this civil war with real sympathy for the people he's fighting against, and he's trying to put a nation back together. He's not really, winning a civil war is better than losing a civil war, but it's not. You're not supposed to be at war within a nation, and so he's appealing to people's better angels, and that's why I came up with the reason I came up with the title was because, in fact, I'll tell you what's not a secret, but in fact, it used to have a name which was much more about the dark sides of where we are, and some marketing people told me, well, it has to be more optimistic, and I realised in the end that that was right, and so, in fact, it changed the way I've told the story, and it changed which video goes first. And you've seen the one that goes first, and I'm very happy that I made that change because I think it's the most important way to frame what I've got to say.
Can't believe the marketing people drove you towards greater optimism and almost altruism.
Well, that's because they're marketing products. They're
Yes,
most
yeah,
marketing. They weren't political spin people, but anyway.
yeah. They'll look in horror now as you tear down their entire world over the course of the ensuing
That'd be
videos.
good. That'd be good.
I'd love. We probably should have a whole episode on the phrase "big ego yet humble." I don't think we'll have a chance to get to that. It sounds like that might be one of the magic ingredients or
Yeah,
compromises of personality types we might need in a new paradigm that you might
yeah,
be envisioning,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
sometimes we need to describe why somebody is a huge personality, but different to somebody who's a complete psychopath and just
Yes,
wants to be a
yes,
CEO.
yes.
In this whole thing, where why are you making these videos? What was there a moment where you just threw a pen across a desk in frustration and said this, and by this you gestured at the whole world, isn't working?
This yes, this has got to fix itself up. I
Yeah.
command you to fix yourself up. Well, it sort of evolved. It was a little before COVID. I started just experimenting with a friend who was teaching public policy at Melbourne University, and we started making videos. And he said to me, "Let's make some videos about the way you think about economics and society." And we were doing that. And at the same time, I was trying to write a book about some of the ideas, but it was more tightly framed around economics. COVID arrived, we got more into this. We went down a bit of a rabbit hole, really, which is that you start entering the medium and you're not just thinking of the medium as a kind of a neutral alternative way to put some ideas. It gives you, it's a medium in which you can't say as many words as in a book or an article, but you can show more. You can show more about the whole person, and you can. And so I just started building these videos and doing the best I could, because here am I with a bunch of ideas, and there's this new genre which is YouTubing and all the different ways that people do it. And I thought, to hell with this, I'll give it a crack. And what's the worst that can happen? Here we are. You might be might be about to tell me, well, actually, Nicholas, this is about the worst that could happen.
No, it's good to be in at the ground floor. I salute you. It's interesting. It's like that the medium becomes the message in some ways. Like I watch people who are able to get 3 concepts across in the first 40 seconds of a video while I'm still introducing my name and job title and context. And I think we all need to, as part of all of this, we all need to be able to get to the effing point really quickly, don't we? We don't have much time, both literally and metaphorically, when it comes to getting the point across. So you're talking about a new way of doing things. Of course, hugely flattered as an Irish person that one of the case studies in the first video is a thing called a citizens' assembly. Were you looking for a citizens' assembly before you found an example, or was it something you'd always dreamt of? And maybe taking a step back from that, what's wrong with what we have in democracy that we need a citizens' assembly?
Okay. So lots of questions there. I guess I think what I've got to offer here is something beyond saying, oh, here's this thing, we're all citizens, we're all nice people. It's all those horrible politicians who sell us down the river all the time. Don't mention that if they told us the truth, we wouldn't vote for them, this sort of thing. Yeah. So there's a sort of sentimental attachment to citizen juries and things like that. And mine is not like that. The more I thought about citizen juries, the more I took the whole thing back to a much simpler, more fundamental conceptual level. And the level is this, that generally speaking, there are 2 ways you can represent everyone in a small group. We're very familiar with doing that by election. We have a competition, somebody wins the competition, and then we say, well, that's you're our guy, sometimes girl, increasingly girl. And then there's this other way to represent the people, which is, so this is representation by election and representation by sampling. In other words, to represent ordinary people, you could even be an ordinary person. Yeah. That's amazing. And then, of course, we have juries and things like that.
You tiptoed those words out like you were uttering a heresy there.
Yeah, well, I'm uttering a profundity, maybe. A kind of, think of this idea that if you represent the people by election, you build your democracy around a certain kind of DNA, a certain kind of a certain kind of logic. And that logic is competitive. That logic is declaratory. It's performative. Is this sounding good to you, Colm? These are the things that are going wrong. And this other way to represent the people is to get the people to represent the people, as they do in juries. And if you ask yourself, for instance, think of the shock jocks that have got stuck into, say, lenient sentencing and so on. They always go after the judge. Why don't they go after the jury? Well, the jury's not doing the sentencing, but I don't know of an example where, for instance, we recently had, I think you'd be familiar with our Cardinal Pell, who was up on child sex charges. A jury unanimously held him guilty. and that was overturned on appeal. Now, let's say I believe the judges who overturned it on appeal. Nobody's saying what a terrible thing those jurors did. They're all saying, well, there but for the grace of God go I. They might have got it wrong, but I might have got it wrong. Now, we don't extend those kinds of indulgences to our politicians because that's not the value prop, is it? The value prop from them is vote for me and everything's going to be fine. Yeah. Vote for my opponent. And look at how slippery and dishonest and greedy they are. So it's an incredibly different kind of world where the public interest is reflected in a completely different way.
And taking a step back again, coming to the conclusion that something, at least alternatives, need to be presented, is it because at some point you're looking at democracies around the place and thinking the system we have is flawed enough such that A, it's not working, and B, it's vulnerable to legitimate criticism such that it might actually be replaced with something far worse, that, we're at a kind of a crisis of democracy anyway.
Yeah. So we are recording this, as you know, Colm, on the day that a new president is elected or steals an election, depending on your point of view. And that country, the United States, in fact, you and I met or I became aware of you, whether we met or not. It was in 2016, and it was at this wonderful conference that we've both gone to since called Kilconomics. And I flew into Dublin in 2016. Donald Trump had just won the election, and two words suddenly popped into my head. And do you know what they were?
Is it oh and no?
The Troubles.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, the Troubles, the Ireland always had troubles, I guess, but the Troubles just started one day. Yeah. And then they kind of got worse, and they got worse, and then they stayed super bad for however long it was, 20 years, and then away they went. And I just thought, well, this could happen to 340 million people. It's just not that hard to imagine this to happen. Yeah. And so much of this, just think about it. We talked a lot about the 1930s. Does this feel like the 1930s? Well, maybe it does. But guess what? In the 1930s, unemployment was 25%, sustained 25%. It's 5%. Are there problems? There are problems. But they're nothing like what they were. So the way I see this is that this DNA, the way we've built democracy around essentially around politicians' capacity, we used to call it persuade, and now we know it's not really persuasion. It's a kind of subconscious process. It's you get your talking points, and I call it peremptory framing. You find a way to frame what your opponent is saying to make them look stupid or evil or whatever. And that's now got so deeply into our public culture that people who are actually not that far apart, they'll be far apart on a few things, and mostly if they met each other in the supermarket, they'd help each other out, they'd give each other the right change and all that sort of stuff, and yet they're wondering whether they're going to go to civil war. It's an extraordinary state of affairs. And I think this other thing that you see in the video just shocks you into saying, hey, why do we make democracy about difference? It is about difference, and it's about sameness. We are in one community, and we have to work out, do we invade Iraq? Do we pay more to the poor or less to the poor? Do we have gay marriage? Do we not have gay marriage? We have to make those decisions and not go to war about them. It's not that hard, but somehow war is more entertaining. And a competitive system runs through a competitive media system, whether it's social media or mainstream media, and let the decades and the generations go by, and we are very much at each other's throats. It's a very sad and strange state of affairs.
Speaking of media and all of that, was there an era when this was done right? Because as you talk about politicians, their appearances on TV are solely about making their opponent look bad or winning,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
short-term brownie points over skills
Yeah.
of rhetoric. But am I right in thinking that maybe 30 or 40 years ago, if a politician was interviewed, they were allowed to talk. Now, whether they were right or wrong, or whether you agreed with them or
Absolutely.
disagreed with them, but they talked for they gave long, complicated
Yeah.
answers
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
nuance,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there weren't any gotchas. Now, you could argue then they were being handled softly, but the dynamic of political discourse was different, even
Absolutely.
within maybe my living memory, but certainly lots of people's living memory.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't. I mean, I was 3 at the time, but you can see it on YouTube. Everyone should watch 10 minutes of John F. Kennedy debating Richard Nixon on the television in 1960, and they debate policy. They talk about policy. Someone the other day was telling me of a long interview with James Callaghan, or Callaghan, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. He was the Prime Minister of Great Britain after Harold Wilson. I don't think there was an intervening one. And they were telling me of an interview they watched when he was Prime Minister, and it was an interview about a program. It was some kind of labour market program and educate something to train young people and put them into a better position to be employed, and it had not been successful. And this was an interview with James Callaghan, the Prime Minister, about why it had gone wrong. And he said, yeah, look, it's gone wrong. We thought this would happen and we were wrong about that, and we tried to correct course, and that was 2 months in, and then we did this, but in the end we decided it wasn't worth proceeding with, and it wasn't a success. Well, you can't. That's completely unthinkable.
Yeah.
So in that sense, everything has all of this stuffing, which is that politics is about policies and what happens. That's all disappeared, and the reason it's disappeared, I would argue, is the reason that in the end, when you're a kid and you hear of Chinese water torture, you think, well, that's not a problem. I can have water dripping on a part of my body. It's really not going to upset me. If you have a system in which the silver tongues, the people who access the emotions, not reason, all of these people consistently outperform their opponents, and then you set the system to run competitively for 20, 30, 40 years, and then you come back, you find what we've got now, which is
unrecognizable.
Unrecognizable, completely unrecognizable. Little factoid for you, speaking of the United States, when Nixon and Kennedy gave that, in fact, in 1968, the average presidential soundbite on US TV was 48 seconds, and just 20 years later, this is before the internet had any influence, just 20 years later, 1988, the average presidential soundbite on network news, 9 seconds.
Okay.
It's all over. It's all over.
So the idea of a citizens' assembly is, if maybe we'll never fix the other way of doing things, let's build a new way over on some green space next to the crumbling citadel, is it?
Yes, but it's not. I'm not saying tear down all the other stuff. What I'm trying to say is we can build modestly. We can build this new thing on a small scale. It's advisory initially. I want it to gain some power over time, but then it sits alongside the system we have. People can compare how it treats the issues. They can. What I like to say to people is, I'm trying to engineer a situation like that scene in When Harry Met Sally, when the woman says, "I'll have what she's having." when people see this, when they see Chris and Finbar actually working it out and working out a result for Ireland rather than just hating each other, they'll say, look, surely can we get some of that in here? And that's the sort of thing that we can do. So to give you another example, in the United States, in Michigan, they have the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. So that draws the electoral boundaries. Now that's an excellent power to give the people, because if you give it to politicians, they'll abuse it. And if you give it to a judge or an official, then of course the politicians, then that gives them an incentive to appoint a crony. So this is the way in which this other type of DNA, as I've called it, can come in. I'm sure if I was a better biologist or medical person, these are retroviruses or something, or RNA, God knows what they are. But the idea is that we take this system, which has very different characteristics, at least from where we see things at the moment, much better characteristics in most senses, but certainly these characteristics of preferring people to compromise and work stuff out together and calm down and take their time. They all exist in this other way to represent the people. So we can incubate it here and then start getting it to improve the system that we have.
And in the example you use, which is in Ireland, and it's about the marriage equality referendum in the Citizens' Assembly, which was convened to discuss that, there was an example of two people who were diametrically opposed. I actually thought it was like a sample fake story that this is what might have happened, and then I looked it up and it's actually true. Almost a Disney-esque.
It is Disney. Well, Mills and Boone.
Yes,
Boone. So these people have a Mills and Boone relationship. I mean, they're both guys and only one of them's gay. But they look at each other. I don't know whether Chris is a young gay guy and Finbar's, I think now about 65, and he was abused as a kid when young, and he associated gay people with his abuser. And he took one look at Chris and wanted to punch him out. And then Chris says, and Chris Chris wasn't doing particularly well for himself. And Chris began by saying, I feel very insecure here. I feel terrible. Yeah. I think I'll leave sooner. Finbar blurts out, yeah, well, that's how I feel. And away they go.
Yeah, no, it's an extraordinary example. We're not claiming this is what's going to replace parliamentary democracy or anything like that, but it is, I suppose, it's a start, isn't it? And appropriately for this first video, it is about a start.
Yes,
like we have to start somewhere, and a bit like James Callaghan in that interview, that if your project needs tweaks that you are comfortable explaining 3 months down the line, well, we started in this way, we started with this video and we tweaked some things, now we're going to try again, because that's how you fix things. Right. And also, given the scope of some of the problems facing the world, for example, climate change or biodiversity collapse or all the wars, there is no actual solution that's going to fix anything. It's literally iteration, trying a thing, but being comfortable with being wrong.
Yeah. I have a little thing that I've come across that just occurred to me, which is that the great vice of intellectuals is what I call motivated impatience. So someone like Karl Marx or Friedrich Hayek, Marx on the left, Hayek on the right, they come up with quite brilliant analyses of what's wrong. And then they say, therefore, do what I say and it'll all get fixed. Would we do that with cancer? Would we think that if we came up with a brilliant new analysis of cancer that we had cured cancer? Absolutely not. So you get an insight, stay humble, keep building, be constructive, build bridges between people, better angels, see what we can do, because what's the alternative?
No better way to wrap up than that. Nicholas, that was great. Looking forward to the next video.
Thanks, Colm.